If you're interested in making a detailed platformer just like this one, within Gamemaker, using drag and drop, then keep watching.
G'day gamers, and welcome back to our drag and drop platformer series. In the last episode we added dual controller support. In this episode we add another expected feature, that of object persistence, allowing enemies and coins to not respawn when we re-enter rooms. So let's get started. Currently in our game, when we kill enemies in one room, then leave the room and return to it, those enemies will respawn. That's because they were placed in the room in the editor, and every time we leave a room, all non-persistent instances are destroyed. They are then created again when we come back to the room. I'd like enemies to stay dead when moving between rooms. Now, Gamemaker offers a really basic solution to this type of problem. It's called room persistence, and it means the room will record the state you were in when you left and will restore the state when you return. So if I go to our first room and I enable room persistence down here, and then I'll go to the second room and do the same thing. And I'm just going to drag room 2 up above room 1 so that we don't have to run across the room to test it. Let's run that. Now, if we jump on an enemy here and then leave and then come back, the enemy and the coins are all still there. It remembers the state we were in. Now that seems to work great, but it does have a few problems. Firstly, as you see, the enemies don't vanish even when they are dead. The enemies also don't reset. So if you have established specific movement patterns tailored to the player when entering the level, they may not work correctly. You will also get text pop-ups being restored too, which can be very odd and unexpected when entering a room. So you'll see the trail there of the 10 appearing. Now, the other thing that happens is that if I keep going back and forth between these two rooms, you'll see the number of leaves are actually multiplying. And that's because that event to create the leaves runs at room start. So they're getting created over and over again, just potentially flooding the room with leaves. Now, these problems are small in our game, but you could find many more things are problematic when you expand on your game. But if you are fine with these limitations, then this is the end of the video for you. Tick the box for each room and go watch some cat videos for 20 minutes instead of listening to me. But if you stick around, I'll show you how to add a system that can work alongside room persistence to give you more control over your game. To achieve this, we need a system for recording which enemies have died. And when we enter a room, we check each enemy to see if it has previously died. If it had, we just don't spawn them. I'm going to track the enemies using a DS list. Basically, a list is very similar to an array. It's just a list of data accessed via an index. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I create a DS list called myList, and I add a few string entries to it like so, now what we've created is a single variable that can store multiple values. And that's basically what an array or DS list is. Arrays are used in all programming languages, but the name DS list is specific to Gamemaker. It's their special version that is the same as an array, but has more features. So to access one of the values in the list, we can use an index, which is just a pointer to a position in the list. The first value has an index of 0, the next has 1, and so on. So we can retrieve any entry in the list by knowing the name of the list and the index value which points to it. So let's create a list for our dead enemies. Let's go into our OGame event, and let's go to our create event. And just above the assigned variable, we're going to create our list. So if I type in list, you'll get the data structure code blocks, and there's one here to create a list. I'm going to call the list global.deadList, dead_list. We'll make it global so we can access it from any other object. Now the thing about DS lists and data structures in Gamemaker is that once they are created, they take up memory, and they will continue to exist even when you restart the game. So you need to ensure they are destroyed when you finish using them. So I'm going to create a cleanup event. Now this will run when the object is destroyed, and in that event, we can destroy the list. Now Gamemaker doesn't give a code block for destroying a list, so we need to actually execute some code to destroy it. So over here, we can execute a code, and we're just going to destroy our dead list, and we just do it with ds_list_destroy. And then we write the name of the list we want to destroy, and it's global.dead_list. But now that we have our list, when our enemies die, we can add them to it. But what do we add? Well, we need a way to identify each enemy uniquely. We can use various bits of information about the enemy to create a unique key for each one. Now, since we might want to use this for other objects, I'm going to create it in a script, which allows us to reuse it when we need to. So let's go to our enemy, and let's add a create event. So we'll add our execute script block, and we need to still create our script. So let's go to scripts, let's right click and create a new script, and I'm going to call it scr_set identifier. Now this is where we'll set the unique identifier for each instance. So let's assign a variable, and I'm going to give the identifier a name. I'm going to call it UID, standing for unique identifier or unique ID. So for this unique identifier to be unique, it's going to be a combination of things that are unique to this particular instance. So I'm going to store this unique identifier as a string. And by a string, that means it is text wrapped in quotation marks. But this identifier needs to be unique to this instance. So let's capture some information about this instance that we can store in that string. So I'm going to put in the room that this instance is in, and we wrap this in the function string, which will convert the room variable into a string. The room variable will be a number, starting at 0 for the first room, and then 1 for the next room. So we're just putting that into a string, and then we want to add that to another string. And this one is going to be the object index, and that means the name of the object. So we've got the room where the instance is in, we've got the object that the instance is created from, and we're also going to add where it actually is in the room. So x plus string y. Make that a bit bigger, you can see what's going on. So this unique identifier will be unique to this instance. So now we have a way to identify each instance uniquely. And at the point where the enemy dies, we need to add this to the dead list. So let's go back to our enemy and just make sure that the create event is running this script. So therefore, this enemy is getting a unique identifier. And when this enemy dies, we need to add the unique identifier to our dead list. Now, where do we put the code to add them to the list? Well, we could add it where the player jumps on their head, and if our enemy vanished afterwards, that would be the correct place. But our enemy actually stays in the room, in the dead state, on the ground. So to make it easier, we can just add it to a room end event instead. Room end events just run once when the room ends. So for our enemy, let's create a room end event. And we can just add the enemy to the dead list if it's in the dead state. So let's put a check in here, and we'll say if our state is equal to our dead state, which is es.dead, then we can update our dead list. So we want to execute a script, and we don't have a script here yet to run, but when we update the list, let's put that in a script as well so that we can use it in other instances. So I'm going to add a comment here. I'm going to say, basically, we are dead. So check if we add our UID to the dead list. Now let's create the script that'll update the list. So right click on scripts, go to create. I'm going to call this one scr_update_dead list. So this is where we add the UID to the dead list. Now the thing about adding an item to a list is we don't want to add it if we already have it in the list. The enemy could have died previously when we left the room and it's already been added to the list. So we need to check to see if our UID is already in that dead list. So up here, let's type list. Let's first check if we are on the list already. So there are two get code blocks for retrieving data from a list. The first one is get list item at, and that will return the value at a particular position in the list. The next one's the one we want, which is get index of list item. So you can use this if you know the item you're looking for, and this will return its position. Whereas the other one will return the value at a position. So you use this one if you know the position of the data you want. You use this one if you know the value of the data you want. So the list we want to get is global.deadlist. And it's going to look in that list and it's going to look for this value. So our value is our UID. And I'm going to set it to a temporary variable. And I'm just going to call that index, because this will return the index or the position of the UID that we're looking for in this list. If it doesn't find it, it will return a value of -1. So we can use that information to say that if the value of index is equal to -1, it means that it didn't find it in the list, so we need to add it. So if our index equals -1, then our UID is not in the list, and therefore we can add it to the list. So under list, there's also an add code block, and our list is called global.dead_list. And we want to add our UID. So let's make some comments here so we know what's happening. So here we're getting the position of our UID in the list. Here we're checking to see if our position is -1. We are not in the list yet. And here, we're just adding our UID to the list. Great, so we've now added our UID to the dead list. So we now need to ensure when the enemy is created, if they are on the list, they get destroyed. So let's go back to our enemy. And in our create event, where we run the set identifier, inside of that script, we can also do the check to see if we're on the list. And if we are, well, then we can basically destroy ourselves. So back into the set identifier script. And now that we've created our UID, we need to check the global list to see if we are in it. So let's look at our list items and let's get the index again. So our list is global.deadlist. The value we're looking for is UID, and we're storing it into index temp. So let's just add some comments here as well so we know what we're doing. So here we're setting my unique ID. Here we're going to get the UID position in the dead list. Now remember, if this returns a -1, that means it's not in the dead list. So let's check for that. So if index is not equal to -1, so this time I'm checking if we're not equal to -1. And that's because we can say that if the list position is not -1, this means it is in the list already. So destroy ourselves. So when we get the index, if -1 is returned, it means that it's not in the list. So therefore, any other value that's returned, it's returning the index position. So we can then say that if the variable returned is not equal to -1, it returned an index position. It means it found itself in the list. So that means we got destroyed previously, so we can't have this instance create itself because it's already been destroyed. So we can just destroy our instance. So just before we run this, I think if we go back to the enemy and look in the room end event, I hadn't assigned the script. So let's just go and make sure that we are updating the dead list at that point. And then we can actually check it to see if it works. So let's click play. Now let's go and see if when we kill an enemy and come back to the room, does that enemy stay dead? So let's just do this enemy here. So let's go to the next room. Let's go back and the enemy is no longer there. So that will work over here as well. We could pop this one and leave. And then when we come back, we only have one enemy. Now say you wanted to also have this apply to other objects. Say coins, for example. Let's go to level 2. And I'm just going to fix up this actually so that we can ensure that we can get back out of here. Let's just make this like that. Okay, so let's go and place some coins here. So under our coins layer, grab a coin. Now I'm just going to turn off the grid and just hold down Alt and just click a few coins right here. Now remember, when coins spawn, they are set to pop up. And we did that so they bounce out of an enemy. So let's play that and let's see what happens when we walk into that room. So they all spring up and bounce. We can grab a few. And if I leave a few and go out and then back in, what happens? Well, they all still stay there. So there's a few things there we need to address. Firstly, I want to be able to place them in a line, floating in the sky, Mario style. So let's go and see if we can do that. Let's go to the parent object because the coins actually have a parent called OObject. And we did that so that we can have other objects in the game be children of OObject, which means they collide and bounce with instances which you might want to add fruit or something else to the game. You just make it a child of OObject and it'll inherit the properties. So let's go into our OObject. And this is where we do our movement. If we want to have the coins be able to be placed in a line, for example, and not pop up or like they do when they're spawned from an enemy, we can set a variable here to enable that to happen. So down under our variables, let's create a new one and let's call it movable. And movable means that it either stays static in one position or it moves when it's spawned. So I'm going to set it to true because when they jump out of the player, we want them to be movable at that point. So over here, we can say if they are movable, if that is equal to true, then we want all of this to apply. And when they're not movable, we won't move, we won't check the ground, we won't do our collision where we move them. They'll just be static in the air. So let's go back to our levels. So let's say here, let's place some coins. So I'm just going to place one and then double click it and go to creation code. Now we've used creation code before when we did our transitions. It just means this code will run when the object spawns. So in here, we can go to our creation code and we can set a variable and we can set our movable to be false, meaning that this coin will not move. It's going to stay in that position. So now that we've set that, I can take a copy and paste of that, and that creation code will come across as well. So let's place a few here. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag to select them all and do a copy paste. And let's just put quite a few here actually. And I'm going to space them out so they're all kind of even. Set our grid to 16 and get that one in the middle. Now I'm going to take a copy of those and go to room 2 and we'll do a similar thing here. So the ones that are here I'm going to get rid of and paste in the ones that we took a copy of because they have movable set. Let's put the grid back on. And let's just place them here. So the other thing we need to do is add our unique identifier code. So back in our object, let's go and add a create event here. And then we can run our unique identifier code. So we'll do a execute script and let's run the code that sets our unique identifier. Now that we've set the identifier, we also need the code to add our coin to the dead list. Now, the coin gets deleted or destroyed when the player collects it. So let's go into our coin where we have our collision with the player. So in here, when the coin bounces, then we're able to collect it. So let's add our script just here. And at this point, we want to do our update dead list. And that will then update the list with our unique identifier, meaning that this coin won't spawn again because we've picked it up. So we can just add a comment here so we know what this is for. This is to ensure we don't spawn again. Now, if we do a quick test there, let's see if that works for us. Now we should have some coins over here. And do we pick them up? No. We can't pick them up. Let's have a look why. So in our pickup code, we're checking to see if our bounce is less than 2. But our coins don't bounce anymore because we've made them not movable. So we need to modify the code to ensure we can pick it up if the movable variable is set to false as well. So I want to have 2 conditions here, not just checking for bounce is less than 2. We also want to check if movable is equal to false, because in both those situations, that's when we're able to pick them up. So if you want to do a double check like that, you can go over here and use the if expression block, and you can actually add multiple expressions in here. So we can say if bounce is less than 2 or movable is equal to false. Now I'm doing a comparison here, and that is why I use double equal signs. So I'm going to click here and then all the way down the bottom, because all of this is for this expression now. We don't need this check because we're now doing it here. So let's test that again. Now when we pick them up, we should find that they work for us. And there we go. And I'm going to leave that one there and then go to the next room. And I'm just going to pick up 1. So when we go back here, we're now left with our single one there. Our enemy's gone. And we have our one here that we just picked up. Now you notice I did bop the enemy and he did drop coins, but they didn't stay when I moved between rooms. So this doesn't work for coins dropped by the enemy. And that's because they were created in the room during the game and not added in the room editor. To make those stay, you could enable the room persistence option, but then you would have the problems we mentioned at the start of the video. You could add a room end event to those objects you don't want to be persistent, like dust or floating text, where you would just destroy them. It won't allow your enemy patrols to reset though. There is also a similar system to what I've shown here, which can totally avoid using room persistence. It's achieved using DS maps combined with DS lists to recreate instances at the start of the room. It's actually something I cover in my Udemy Platformer Fundamental series, which I'm working to complete at the moment, so look for that in the future. If you're interested in creating a complete game in Gamemaker, you can check out my Udemy course. I've added the coupon code in the description, which will give you 90% off the retail price. It's one of the highest rated Gamemaker 2 courses on the site, so that might be something you're interested in. Lastly, if you'd like to support the channel and receive bonus content, as well as early access to tutorials and the source code from many of my projects, you can do so over on Patreon. This month, I want to thank these legendary supporters whose generosity helps make the content possible. Dylan Jackson, Fox and Raven Ent, and Kaiser Ho. Also, thank you to these epic supporters for their kindness: Skydevil Palm, Sheldon ENTP, Salvatore Capolino, Dan Half, and Claypot. Thank you to these rare supporters for their support too. Lastly, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps me build the channel and create more cool content. That's all for now. I'll talk to you in the next one.